An innocent person sits across from an investigator and says, "I didn't do it." Hours later, that same person picks up a pen and signs a confession. The signature looks like proof. Why would anyone admit to a crime they know they did not commit? In some cases, the first thing that makes the confession possible is not weakness, stupidity, or hidden guilt. It is innocence. An innocent person often enters the room expecting a misunderstanding to be corrected. They believe the evidence will confirm their story. And because they have nothing to hide, caution can feel unnecessary or even suspicious. In one mock investigation study, innocent participants were more likely than guilty participants to give up their right to remain silent. Many trusted their innocence to protect them. A guilty person may recognize the danger immediately. An innocent person may believe cooperation is the fastest route out. So they talk. They stay. They keep explaining because every new detail feels like one more chance to clear everything up. Then the rules change. The investigator no longer sounds uncertain. They speak as though guilt has already been established. There is evidence, they say, something that supposedly contradicts the denial. The person remembers one reality. The authority in front of them appears certain that another reality can be proven. At first, the person tries harder. They repeat the same account, search their memory, and correct every misunderstanding. But if each denial is treated as resistance, explanation stops working. The person is no longer helping to discover what happened. They are being asked to explain why the investigator's version appears stronger than their own memory. The problem is no longer, how do I explain what happened? It becomes, how can their evidence exist if my memory is correct? The person may still know they are innocent, but they no longer see a clear way to prove it. And as the questioning continues, the goal quietly changes. At the beginning, the goal was to protect the future, preserve the truth, avoid a charge, leave with their innocence recognized. After enough repetition, isolation, stress, and exhaustion, the future becomes abstract. The present becomes unbearable. Two thoughts begin to dominate. If I sign, this stops. And because I'm innocent, I can correct it later. The confession no longer feels like an admission of guilt. It begins to look like an exit. The choice is no longer experienced as truth versus lie. It feels like continuing an unbearable situation versus signing a document that can supposedly be challenged later. One danger hurts now. The other feels distant and reversible. That is how an innocent person can sign while still thinking, this is false. Exhaustion can make that short-term escape even harder to resist. In a controlled experiment, sleep-deprived participants were more likely to sign a false statement, saying they had broken an important rule during an earlier task. Even in that simplified setting, fatigue made resolving the immediate situation more powerful than protecting against a future consequence. So the signature does not prove that belief has changed. A person can confess without believing the confession. That answers the first mystery. If this changed your perspective, leave a like. But it opens a more disturbing one. How could someone who knowingly signs a lie later become uncertain that it was a lie? The answer begins with the conflict already created in the room. The person still remembers being innocent. But an authority claims that reliable evidence proves something else. Why would they be so certain? What if something happened during a moment the person cannot reconstruct perfectly? No one remembers every minute of an ordinary day in complete detail. Under accusation, each missing detail can begin to feel like a place where the authority's version might fit. The first internal shift does not have to be, I did it. It can be much smaller. Maybe my memory is incomplete. That uncertainty creates space for suggestion. A person may still remember the same fragments while becoming less certain that those fragments tell the whole story. Once confidence weakens, the suggested explanation no longer has to defeat a clear competing memory. It only has to fill a gap. A classic laboratory experiment showed how this can begin. Participants were accused of causing a computer failure by pressing a forbidden key. They had not pressed it. But when another person falsely claimed to have seen them do it, more participants signed the admission. Some only complied. Others became uncertain. A few even began describing how the event might have happened. Not everyone who falsely confesses comes to believe the story, but the movement can begin in the same direction. First, the person says what the authority wants, so the situation will end. Then, the authority repeats the statement back as evidence. The person hears their own words attached to an event they cannot explain. The confession is no longer only something imposed from outside. It is now something they personally said and signed. And that changes the next question. Before the signature, the person only had to defend their memory against the accusation. After the signature, they also have to explain their own behavior. Why did they agree? Why did they repeat details? Why is their name at the bottom of the page? Even if the answer is pressure, exhaustion, or the desperate hope of going home, those explanations can feel less concrete than the document in front of them. The confession now has something the original accusation did not have: the appearance of personal confirmation. If they later withdraw the confession, the document does not disappear. Now the denial must compete with a statement that seems more specific, more decisive, and more damaging because it came from the person themselves. To an outsider, the retraction can look like regret after an admission rather than a correction of something false. The person therefore faces a new contradiction. The truth is still the same, but defending it has become harder. They must now explain not only the accusation, but their own apparent agreement with it. And once the confession exists, it does not remain a single sheet of paper. Investigators can quote it. Earlier denials can appear dishonest. Ambiguous details can begin to look connected because the confession supplies a story that joins them together. The person may also be asked to explain parts of that story. When they cannot remember them, they may search for possibilities. Perhaps this happened first. Perhaps that explains the missing moment. Perhaps this is what the investigator means. Those possibilities are not necessarily memories. But repeated inside a story that already carries their signature, they can begin to feel less foreign. This is the late trap. The person wanted the signature to end the immediate pressure. Instead, the signature can become the strongest source of pressure that follows. They keep meeting the same version of events, in questions, in evidence, and in their own words. But now it carries their name. That is what makes the confession so dangerous. They entered the room believing innocence would organize the facts around the truth. Instead, their own statement can begin organizing the facts around the accusation. Return to the first image, an innocent person holding a pen above a confession. The signature did not necessarily mark the moment they decided they were guilty. It may have marked the moment when ending the present felt more urgent than protecting the future. They signed because they believed the truth could rescue them later. But once the confession existed, the accusation gained their voice, their name, and their apparent agreement. An innocent person can confess before belief changes. And in some cases, the confession itself can help create the doubt that follows. Subscribe to Wonder Ledger for more hidden rules of being human. What should we uncover next?